What's good, YouTube? Steph here, and welcome to Theta Space. Changing it up this week, I'm actually not going to talk about any music. Scott Lade of Prog Corner just did a ranking of Kurt Vonnegut books, so I'm going to go BOOKTUBE on this one and talk about my favorite novel, the science fiction epic Cyteen by C.J. Cherryh. Cyteen is set in Cherryh's universe that's been called Merchanter or Alliance Union, and it encompasses a large number of her books and series. Her popular First Contact series, which is also called Foreigner after the first volume, is generally regarded as not part of the Merchanter universe, but books that are part of this setting include the Cherryh series and the Fated Sun trilogy, the Morgaine books, and the shared universe of Merovingian Knights, as well as a number of standalones. Cyteen was always intended to be a single book, like I have here. But on the first printing, the publisher split it into a trilogy, 3 volumes titled The Betrayal, The Rebirth, and The Vindication. Later, it was reprinted in 1 volume. Cyteen won the Hugo Award for Best Novel in 1989, as well as the SF Chronicle Award, the Locus Award, and it was nominated for the British Science Fiction Association Award. In 1998, it was ranked 38th in the Locus Award All-Time Best SF Novel Before 1990 poll. Incidentally, Down Below Station was number 25 in the same poll and won the Hugo in 1982. The foundation of this milieu is that humans started building space stations around other stars in the 21st century, and what with communications being limited to the speed of light and travel even slower, Earth's authority over the colonies grew pretty weak and ineffective. It only got worse when life was found on a planet in the Tau Ceti system, which is called Pell's star in this future history. The aliens are primitive but intelligent, and that world, which came to be called Pell's World or Down Below, and the natives called Downers, that became a starting point for the colonists to expand even farther into the beyond. All through this, trade was maintained by a culture of merchanters, spacers who lived on their ships and traveled between the stations carrying goods and information. Eventually, faster-than-light travel was developed in the mid-23rd century, and Earth tried again to establish control over its colonies, but they botched the job and the colonies revolted outright. Earth Company then built FTL battleships and dispatched them to bring the rebel colonies back into line. As the 24th century began, the colonists of the stations beyond Pell declared themselves an independent union, with a capital U, with their capital on a planet called Cyteen, orbiting the star we call Lalande 46650 or Gliese 908. This escalated the situation to full-on war. Union built its own war fleet and raised an army of cloned soldiers they call Aussie, since their born population wasn't up to the task of filling out the ranks. Far from Earth and Sol System, the Earth Company fleet had trouble keeping supplied, so they fell to raiding stations and merchanters for both material and personnel, essentially becoming pirates. Eventually, the war was ended by the Treaty of Pell, and that story is told in the novel Down Below Station. In that book, all this backstory is gradually given to the reader, but in Cyteen, it's summarized and presented at the beginning as an educational history lesson for Union citizens. So, from the perspective of Earth, and maybe even the Merchanters Alliance, Union seems like a scary totalitarian regime with armies of conditioned soldiers who all look alike and think alike. I'm sure people reading Down Below Station in the 80s also had associations with Soviet Russia in mind when Cyteen's soldiers were on stage. That's the perspective the reader gets in Down Below Station, and in a couple of novels set in Sol System at the beginning of the war. Those would be Heavy Time and Hellburner. But that was centered on Pell, which was the battlefront in the last campaign of the Company Wars. Cyteen is set entirely in Union space, mostly on the planet Cyteen itself, decades later. Union is comprised of the most distant colonies from Earth, and even before the Independence War, they needed to generate a lot of population quickly. So the primary industry on Cyteen is people, who are produced in the birth labs at the scientific facility Rezun. The labs turn out Aussie clones with specifically tailored gene sets, classified by Greek letters from Alpha down to Rho, which is reminiscent of Brave New World and might have been delivered on the part of the author. Each class has a range on something called the Resner scale, with alphas being at least 160 and ranging as high as 215, and Rho class scoring 45 and below. It's not really said, but I figure Resner scores are something akin to IQ, so the text mentions that a score of 190 is verging on genius. Along with the womb tanks at the birth labs, the other technology that makes ASI possible is called tape. For any particular gene set, there's one or more psych sets that the ASI can be programmed with. This basically implants a personality with beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors appropriate to that gene set. This kind of deep tape is usually administered to the subject with a cataphoric drug so that the tape instructions will be accepted without question or judgment. Considering this, it's understandable how Earth and Alliance can see the whole ASI concept as creepy. In fact, I know somebody who's a fan of Cherryh but hates this book because, as she puts it, ASI are human beings too. Citizens, or born men, are actually produced from the same labs that produce the ASI. The difference is that citizens are raised by parents or nannies, as throughout history, while ASI start getting tape from day one. It seems nobody bothers to carry pregnancies the old-fashioned way on Cyteen, but honestly, with womb tank technology available, who would want to? Citizens use tape as well for purposes ranging from simple entertainment to education to skills training. The tape drug is used in these applications as well for immersion in the entertainment tapes or better absorption of learning or training, but dosages are typically lighter, especially for recreational tape. Any place in Union can have birth labs to produce citizens and ASI, but all tapes have to come from Rezun, and they're created by specialists in tape design who know how to match psych sets with particular gene sets. The director of Rezun is a woman named Ariane Emory, a genius in genetics, sociology, and tape design. She's so brilliant, in fact, that she's one of only 14 people in all Union designated as a special, a national treasure by law to be protected at any cost. Specials are effectively above the law, as a criminal investigation always involves a psych probe, interrogation under the same drug used to administer tape, and the risk of altering the genius of the special's mind in that situation is considered unacceptable. Apparently it's A-OK to risk altering a non-special person's mind under psych probe, though. One particular project on Emory's plate is Psychogenesis, or mind cloning. There had been an attempt in the past to clone Estelle Bach, the scientist who had discovered FTL space travel, but it failed to recreate the genius of the original. Emory's plan is to use a young chemist whose life has been rigorously documented due to congenital health issues, clone him, and raise the clone as closely as possible to the original's upbringing, thereby duplicating the personality and ability as well as the physiology. So with that background information set, here's the plot setup. The main protagonist of Cyteen is Justin Warwick, who is 17 at the beginning of this story. He's a citizen at Rezun, and he's a parental replicate, a clone of his father, Jordan, who is actually another special and a tape designer. Justin's a student of tape design himself and studies with Emory. Jordan has a history with Ariane Emory, once a co-worker and now a rival. Justin has a brother of sorts, an alpha-class ASI named Grant, created from the gene set of an unnamed special and designated experimental. Grant was given to Justin by Emory to be raised alongside Justin. There are several good reasons for this, primarily that alphas turn out a lot more stable and resilient when they're socialized from an early age, as well as providing a companion for Justin. Ariane Emory herself designed the tapes that give Grant his psych set. Anyway, he and Justin are as close as real brothers, and the expectation is that when they become adults and Justin is licensed to supervise alphas, Grant will become his companion, as an alpha ASI named Paul is his father's. Political machinations involving Union's governing council, on which Emory sits, and an attempt by Jordan to get his family transferred out of Rezun and out from under Emory's thumb, result in Justin making a mistake that endangers Grant and risks exposing his father's association with some political extremists. And it puts Emory in a position to blackmail Justin into cooperating with her. What she wants turns out to be sex with a young man who is essentially a younger Jordan. When Justin shows up to her apartment of an evening, she drugs him, puts pornographic tapes on, and rapes him with the assistance of her ASI bodyguards, Florian and Caitlin. Justin comes away from this with severe PTSD in the form of tape flash. Physical contact with another person causes flashbacks to the night in Emory's apartment. Jordan confronts Emory alone in her lab later. We don't get to be present for their conversation, but the next thing we know, Justin's apprehended by security and subjected to hard interrogation. It turns out that Ariane Emory was found dead, and certain interests favor Jordan as the suspect. As a special himself, Jordan can't be interrogated. He can't even volunteer to testify under probe. And using his son as a lever, pressure is put on him to confess to the murder and be exiled to a research facility on Planus, which is the continent on the far side of the world. Justin and Grant are to remain at Resume under heavy scrutiny. Meantime, Resume administration is in upheaval, and when it settles down, the administrator is Dennis Nye, brother of Resume head of security Gerard Nye. They decide to continue the Psychogenesis project with the chemist subject as a cover for the real aim, which is recreating Ariane Emory herself, which it turns out was actually her intention as well. So the project begins. A clone of Ari Emory is started along with copies of Florian and Catelyn. Even though they're alpha, they'll be the easy part of the project because they're still Azzy and they get most of their development through tape. The rest of the novel takes place over a couple of decades. Baby Ari is born. The Nyes make things happen in her life because they happened in Ari Sr.'s life. And she's introduced to Florian and Catelyn at the appropriate time. Incidentally, the original bodyguards were put down shortly after the death of Ari Sr., another reason my acquaintance hates this book. Young Ari takes an interest in Justin and Grant, which displeases Resume administration, the brothers Nye, and displeases Justin even more because every time he encounters her, he's hauled into security for another probe. Eventually, this relaxes a bit as Ari starts building her power base. She's able to get Justin and Grant into her department and under her protection, and she's able to start picking up the work her predecessor left unfinished, with help of a lot of recorded messages Ari Sr. left for her successor. There's a lot more plot that I'm eliding here. It's not really germane to the primary thread of the story. Besides the world building here and the concept of the premise, there's a lot of philosophical discussions between Justin and Grant about the nature of consciousness and the differences between born citizens and Azzy. It's also conveyed how isolated and alone they are in a hostile environment, constantly watched by security and considered pariahs among the staff. Grant is my next favorite character after Ari II. I like how he's a rock of stability for Justin, even as Justin is his rock. And it's fascinating watching Ari grow up and come into her power. Even though her predecessor is only alive for the first 100 pages or so of nearly 700, we get a good sense of who she was and how successful the project is at recreating her and her successor. The mystery of who murdered her is left unresolved, and honestly, I don't like the resolution that's given in the sequel novel Regenesis. The killer turns out to be someone new who we never even hear about in this book, much less meet. I think that's kind of a cheat if you're writing a murder mystery, so it's a good thing the Cyteen is not a murder mystery. My other issue is with the end, and I'm going to be spoilery here, so if you don't want it spoiled, jump ahead to the time indicated here. Still with me? Okay, so late in the book, there's an attempt on Ari's life, and it turns out Dennis Nye is behind it. This is in the last 20 or so pages, and when he's found out, he holes up in the security wing and doesn't let himself be taken alive. Now, I've read this book at least a dozen times, and even looking for the early signs of Dennis's betrayal, I just don't see them, so this twist just comes out of nowhere. But even with those gripes, this is still my favorite book. It's everything science fiction should be. Imaginative, thought-provoking, and above everything else, it's a story about people. Some readers say that the beginning, which is full of political maneuvering, is a slog and hard to get through, but I'm not one of them. I love this book from front to back. In fact, I think I'm overdue to reread it. It's been at least a couple of years. So has anyone else read this or anything else in Cherryh's Alliance Union setting? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Also, please smash like if you up and hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost anything. I'll be back again soon, and I hope you will be too. Until then, bright moments. Steph out.